Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I think, let's see, we have people are starting to roll in. Hello, hello. Welcome to November and happy Diwali for those of you who celebrate Happy New Year. And of course, so many beautiful celebrations going on this time of year. It's hard to believe that 2024 is soon coming to a close. It's unbelievable, honestly. Welcome, everyone. If we haven't met yet, my name is Dr. Shamini Jan. I'm the founder and CEO of a beautiful social profit, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, which brings to you these beautiful free Friday webinars/dialogues on healing with leading teachers, scholars, and practitioners in the community. And I am so pleased to share with you a new member of our community that I don't think many of you have met yet before because it's the first time we've had her on a webinar, and that is Haunani Chong Drake. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Haunani Chong Drake is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, a licensed acupuncturist, and an international yoga and Ayurveda practitioner, educator, and mentor. She is adjunct faculty at Virginia University of Integrative Medicine and William and Mary, as well as board member for the Acupuncture Society of Virginia. Haunani has been in practice since 2011, co-founding Ocean Acupuncture, which is a community-based acupuncture clinic in North County, San Diego. And she works at has worked in various integrative health clinics, including USMC Naval Hospital, Camp Pendleton, and John D. Dingle Veteran Medical Center in Detroit. She is currently the lead LAC at William and Mary's Integrative Health and Wellness Center. As a proud mixed Asian American raised in a Hawaiian community, she continues to nourish and take her ancestral and mixed cultural roots into her work through a lens of cultural stewardship and as examples of healing, awakening, and liberation for all bodies and the earth. Haunani loves belly-aching laughs, random dance parties, being in the ocean, and a soul-stirring bowl of ramen. No wonder she is one of my soul sisters. Haunani, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here with your community today.
It's really great to have you with us, and it's a great time to talk about energy and the flows of how we understand energy. As you know, many of us here at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative um, are very into energy. We've been exploring it through that westernized term called the biofield, but many of us come to this work from different directions. And I know that you have steeped yourself in beautiful immersions, first, learning as a scholar, of course, of the tradition, but also very much as a practitioner and a teacher of the tradition. And we throw these vernacular words around like prana and chi and ki and yin and yang often. And we may have some sense of what they mean, but we understand also that these are very deep beyond concepts. They are principles of life, that if we can understand them more deeply and understand how we work with them in our day-to-day life, we can really benefit. And I'm so pleased that you're going to share with us a little bit of how we really can understand yin and yang from a deep practitioner perspective. So I understand that you may have some slides that you'd like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to point out that, these concepts like chi and prana, my website name, to a certain group of us, that's like saying red, blue, ocean, tree. And so please submit your questions and ask us questions if we're saying things as if they are a color, but it's new to you. I really want to make sure that our time today, the reason why I called it nature's language is to break apart some of the theoretical confusing aspects so that we can really apply it to our lives immediately. When you get off of this video call today, or for those of you watching the recording, you can start integrating it immediately. To me, that is so important, and part of what keeps me engaged in community events is because I spend so much time in my head, and so much of it can be so theoretical and philosophical. And what I have found the most liberation in is being able to apply it and then to see how it magically shows up in our lives the more we apply it. It's a practice, right? It's a practice, practice, practice. So I look forward to sharing with you a little bit more about this concept of yin yang. So real quick, just for anyone who's going, what is she saying anyway? I showed up to my master's program in acupuncture and Chinese medicine saying yin yang. I mean, I just grew up with that for decades, calling it yin yang. And one of the first things I learned, and even though I come back, I have background, my popo, my grandma is Chinese. I didn't learn Chinese. You know, I'm part of that generation where you didn't learn your grandmother's or your parents' language because they wanted you to be so fluent in English. So I quickly learned that yin yang is a more appropriate way to say it. Again, I'm not fluent in Chinese, so bear with me, and I'm sure someone can correct me on my pronunciation, but that's what I'm saying is yin yang, not yin yang. So, and again, no shame. I never want any of you to feel shameful, or this is all about learning. So just a brief understanding of where yin yang comes from. It is a philosophy, okay? I'm going to bring it in through the lens of Chinese medicine. And it is also one of these three foundations here on the screen are really the three pillars of what you could integrate and thread through the term East Asian medicine, which gives honor and homage to how Chinese medicine has spread through different countries. So Korean medicine, Japanese medicine, Vietnamese medicine, you know, when there's not actual boundaries, but there's states and territories, but this medicine has spread. So yin yang is one of the philosophies that are at the assumption or the foundational roots of these medicines, of these practices. But we know it's not just Chinese medicine, right? Like this goes into different philosophical practices around the world, and every culture that I am aware of. I grew up in a Hawaiian community as a hula dancer, as a practitioner of storytelling, but also learning the healing modalities along the way. And they even have their own variation and version of these concepts of cycles of yin yang, of qi or prana or mana or, you know, ki. So I'm going to speak through the lens of Chinese medicine today when we speak of yin yang, but please know that I really encourage each of us to look at our cultural roots. Even if we don't have a foundation for it now, it's in your blood, it's in your DNA, it's in your bones, and to start to explore what might be an equivalent to what we cover today in terms of this idea of yin yang. So some of the original historical references go back all the way to about 700 BCE to the Book of Change. And many of you may have heard the Book of Change, also known as the I Ching. So the author of the I Ching talks about yin yang as if it's already a developed concept, not just laying it out as, oh, I'm contemplating this new idea. So we know that yin yang has been around even longer than that, because some of the first written records of it, it's so well developed. It's almost like an assumption, a side note that it's so well developed. So I would love to know if we had time to get into all of your current understanding of yin yang, and maybe if you want to pull up the chat box and share some of your ideas and your understandings, this would be a good time to do that. How have you heard it? Where did you hear it? Is it a brand new concept to you? I'm just going to give a moment to let people put that in the chat box.
Jason, just make sure the chat box is enabled. Sometimes if we don't see things in the chat, it's because it's not enabled. Okay, here we go. Feminine and masculine. Okay, that's one sense of it, like, right, that there's something connected to yin and yang that is feminine and masculine. Great. Duality.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, duality.
Concept, yin yang, cyclic changes, balance. Okay. Yeah, great.
Yeah, these are beautiful. Exactly. I mean, and this is exactly, you're all correct. So if you want to leave the presentation. No, we're going to get into making it very practical though, because yeah, I mean, there is some element of these concepts, but how can we use it in our lives? So let's get into that. Thank you everyone who participated and added to the chat. So Yin Yang theory is more than just a duality. And I've put the image of the Tai Chi Chu, which is the symbol that some people refer to as the Yin Yang symbol. But one of the things I really want to emphasize more than anything is that it's not a two-dimensional image. We see it in two dimension because we're looking at papers or computer screens or books, but the concept of yin yang comes from a three-dimensional place, and it's actually bigger, but that symbol is spherical. It's three-dimensional. It's not a flat circle, it's spherical. And because of its sphere, it's a reflection of our planet that we live on. And so the concept of yin yang comes from, there's a oneness, and from the one begets a two, or there becomes two. And the two aspect is this duality of yin yang. But it's not a duality. I oftentimes don't even use that word duality. There's all different traditions, especially through the Vedas, that talk about duality and non-dual. And I can't help but weave that in because it reflects this concept of yin yang, where yes, we begin to talk about things in a dual nature, but the reality of it is it's coming from the oneness of all things. And so yin yang actually begins to divide or separate in a way that simply allows us to bring concepts into categories and into identifying their qualities in nature, whether it's earth, whether it's, earth is different from soil, that's different from metal, that's different from air, that's different from fire, right? So yin yang begins to understand that we have this spherical sense of being in the world, and that these two phases, the yin, which would be represented by the dark area, and the yang, represented by the light area, are constantly in motion. No matter where you are on the sphere, you have a different perspective. And that because of that, every little micro movement you make, you're in a different place. It also represents that everything is constantly in motion. And we know that. I mean, we think we're not moving at a few thousand miles per hour on Earth because you're just standing there. But the reality is we're traveling at thousands of miles per hour as the Earth spins. And this yin yang theory is reminding us of that cyclical movement, right? There's movement to it, and that there's always change. This movement and this change also is a metaphor, is a representation of all things that we experience here on this planet through the human experience, and that these two aspects also can explain how energy comes into matter, and then how matter can move back out into energy, right? And so all of us here, or most of us here, are pretty I call myself a chi geek, right? Like I'm super obsessed with the concept of chi and energy and prana and mana and all of these things. But energy and matter are not two ends of a spectrum, but in East Asian medicine, it's part of the spherical whole. And as you can see in this diagram, right, the yin is transforming. It's getting less and less and less, turning into yang, and yang transforms and becomes less and less and turns in yin. So there's this constant movement. There's this constant transformation of yin and yang and in interaction all the time. Also, part of that energy and matter, right? They're two states of a continuum, and not a linear continuum, but a spherical continuum, is that within the yin, there's always going to be yang. And within yang, there's always going to be yin. And that's what the dark part of the larger white area represents, that you cannot separate them. They're always a little bit of yang and yin, and there's always a little bit of yin and yang. And then it's a microcosm. So even if we zoomed really far into this dark little area in the upper right corner, within that would be a replication of this entire whole, where even within this yin that's within the yang, you would find more yang within the yin and yin within the yang. So we can't separate them. And so this is really important. That describes the different relationships, and yin and yang are a constant relationship. And so the way that I like to bring this into our lives is everything in our lives is really, when we boil it down to, when we strip away the fancy concepts, when we strip away the would have, could have, should have, all of these parts of life that define who we are, really what we're looking at and what we get the opportunity to play with or analyze or philosophize. And for me, as a healthcare practitioner, it's more important to actually be a participant in, are all these different relationships. Mm. What is the relationship between me and Mother Earth, or Earth? I'll just say Earth, right? No gender there, me and Earth. What is my relationship between me and what I would consider the cosmos or God or the beloved or universal energy? What is my relationship with myself? What is my relationship with my family? What is my relationship with community? What is my relationship with work? You can go on and on, right? What's my relationship with money? And oftentimes when we start to look at our relationships, it's really easy to add labels: good, bad, avoidant, disassociated, all in, right? Whatever our label is for that relationship, the label actually is beneficial in that it allows us to create meaning, allow you and me, if we're talking about a relationship, to bring our attention to a particular somewhat agreed upon understanding. But the reality of our real lives is that the labels that I use mean something different for you than they do for me. We think we're talking about, let's say, anger, or we're talking about a headache, these labels that we might use. But in reality, my headache is probably very different from your headache. Or my version of anger and how I experience anger, my relationship with anger, is very different than how you experience anger.
So are you saying that our experience of yin and yang also is just, it's phenomenological, it's qualia based, right? Our
It's very cool. Yeah.
experience is
Yeah.
different. Are you saying that one person's yin is another person's yang?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying, Shamini, is that we can talk about them as if we know what yin is and what yang is. But again, my variation of yin and how it's embodied in my experience absolutely could be someone else's yang. Mm. And that also can still say very philosophical, and there's too much gray. How do we ground this into reality? Because then what is reality? Well, we know all of reality is energy. Well, you and I do, Shamini.
Yeah, I dare say everyone.
Yeah, everyone here does. Yeah, yeah. but again, yin yang reminds us that energy in different forms turn into matter. Matter is still energy. It's just its condensity. It's density of energy, what makes form that we can touch, we can measure, we can see, we can hear. And so yin and yang really is the basis for us to begin to understand, well, it's not just theoretical, but it's in our lives. Yin and yang shows up in the cyclical movements. I think someone put that in the chat, right? It's cyclical movements and phases. You can see, maybe, I'm sorry for those of you who have screens that are a little pixelated, but you can apply this yin yang image over our circadian rhythm, the night and day cycles, and it matches. It really is the yin and yang cycle, where midnight would be yin of yin, the most yin part, and midday, when the sun is at the highest, is the yang of yang. But we don't go straight from midday to midnight. We actually have to have a transition to sunset that reduces the amount of yang or the sun so that we can come into midnight, and vice versa. We can't just go straight from midnight to midday. We need the transitions. And then we see this pattern. It becomes a pattern. These patterns of yin and yang begin to show up everywhere in our relationships, right? In the seasons, winter and summer, and then we have our transitional seasons of spring and autumn. We can see this in terms of our states of density and matter, right? Energy down to matter. When we start talking about different phases, like, or some people call them elements in Chinese medicine, I like to call them more movements or phases, where it's talking about water, metal, fire, earth, and wood. We're actually looking at these different biological systems that are also in cyclical movement, right? Whether we're talking about the hydrology cycle or the decomposition cycle of earth. It's all the same pattern over and over and over again, which represents yin transforming into yang and yang transforming into yin.
I want to remind people too, if you have a question for Haunani, we will get to questions. Please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us on Zoom. Because that is where we will see them and we will get to them. So please do use the Q&A box for questions.
Yeah. So this is how we can begin to use it in our life, is understanding there is a tension, right? There is a contrast between yin and yang. Let me go back one slide because this is important. Yin, and it's a busy slide. I know that. So I'm going to, if this is too busy, just close your eyes and listen. Yin is a word that helps to depict the shadow side of a mountain or a hill. So we're talking about the shadow side. Yang is represented and describes the sunny side. So right there, just based on how much sun or how much light is on this side of the mountain, we can begin to understand how the qualities would differ, right? If you're on the sunny side of a mountain, it's going to be more expansive. It's going to be hotter, right? Things are going to grow at different rates than on the shadow side of a mountain, where it's going to be more dense, more dew, concentration. Everything's moving more inward. And so that's really where we begin to understand what I consider the embodiment. When I say embodiment, yes, in our own but embodiment of Earth, right? Like on planet Earth, of how we can begin to work with these concepts of yin and yang. Yin is more centering. You can see those images, all the arrows moving inward. Yang is more outward and expansion. And so it's this dichotomy of the shadow side and the light side, or the sunny side and the shadow side of the mountain, that is in relationship to each other. And so then as this theory grows, we can apply yin yang to almost any relationship on Earth, whether it's space, right? Earth is more yin than yang. And that's the other thing, is they're always relative to each other. Nothing is fully yin, nothing is fully yang. Even within Earth, right, we still have a little yang in it, right? The yang within the yin. And in the heavens, even though we might consider that more yang, we know there's yin out there. We call them the planets, the things we observe and we take pictures of. So they're relative to each other, and we're really looking at the proportion of the yin and yang that really starts to describe what density it's at. If something is more yin, it's going to have more density. It's going to have more matter. It's going to be more measurable to our own human senses, right? Something we can measure and we can touch. Something that's more yang is going to have more space between it. It's going to be more active. And so those are the subtle aspects of life. We can sense it. A lot of us here can sense it. Some of it, you see it. But this is what we're talking about, is the relative amount of subtleness around us, right? Yang is much more subtle. We might not see it, maybe harder to even measure unless you have really, really fine-tuned tools. Yin is more the things we can see under a microscope. We can touch, we can feel, we can pick up our cup, right? That would be more yin. But we have time, night and day. We have our seasons. Autumn and winter are more yin, more on the shadow side of the sun, of the mountain, than spring and summer. Female is associated with yin, more receptive, on the cooler side, and yang. And what's interesting, I'm obsessed with bringing this into healthcare. And so it's really fascinating to me, as more women's health and more female bodies are looked at in research, right? Like basal temperatures tend to be lower, not for everyone, but tend to be lower. And I immediately thought, oh, there's more yin, right? And it's not going to be 100%, but it's really fascinating to see how it shows up once you have this perspective. When we're just talking about temperature, cold, yin, hot, yang. Weight, things that are heavy, that have more weight to them, are more yin. Things that are more light, more yang. In terms of brightness, things that are darker or darker tones are more yin. Lighter tones are more yang. Anything that is down and in, or things that are non-moving, are more yin. Things that are more active and outgoing are more yang. And so I'm not going to go through every single one of these slides because I've already said a lot of it. But one thing I really want to point out is that they're rooted in each other. So even when we start, I go back to the slide, we have these categories for them, but we have to always remember to not keep them categorized as only yin and only yang, because there's a little bit of yang in the yin and yin in the yang. So there is a little contradiction in yin and yang that throws some people off, especially if they've grown up in a culture where there's always like A is A and B is B, and neither two can be A, B, right? But this is kind of the mental gymnastics that we have to go through when we start exploring different philosophies. Okay, so I want to bring it into the body because I think this is really interesting. Many of us here on this call are in the, when I say healing profession, it could be medicine, it can be healthcare, it could be integrated professionals, it can be, healing and energy work. And it's really fascinating to me to then bring yin and yang into the body. So when we're looking at the body, the physical body, not the body, mind, spirit body, but the lowercase b body, we can see parts of the body that are more yin and areas of the body that are more yang. So the front side of the ventral side of our body is considered to be more yin. And the way to remember that is when we're in a fetal position, when we're developing, we're growing kind of like in this hunched, flexion of the spine posture. All that is growing in here is yin. It's like you're hugging yourself. Mm. This is one of those reasons I can't help but to think, like that posture in yoga asana, child's pose, where you're humbly bowing forward to yourself, we're prostrating to the earth. That's how I see it. And that's what it feels like to me. But there is this inward, almost like recreating that inward movement towards the yin. And child's pose is considered to be calming to the nervous system. So that cooling nature, right? The backside, the dorsal side of our body is more yang. It's exposed to the sun. It's like the sunny side of the mountain. This would be the shadow side, right? This is the part of the world that everyone sees a lot of. We can't see it as easy, but others see it, right? Below the waist is more yin. Above the waist would be more yang. That's just in relation to earth and heaven. Interior, more medial, is yin. Exterior is lateral. Downward, that's the repeat, downward, yin, upward, yang. Structures. So anything that we can touch and feel is considered to be more yin. Anything that is having to do with subtleness. So not only our physiology, but even those aspects of our physiology that we can't necessarily see with a naked eye, more yang. The energy that flows through us, the biofield, is more yang. And what's interesting to me is, East Asian medicine, Chinese medicine, everything has to do with the biofield. Like, we don't exist without the biofield. So understanding yin yang is just an extension of just recognizing that there is a biofield, that there is chi, and every absolute thing that we experience and that we're in relationship is just energy. It's just looking at what degree of energy is it in. Is it in a more yang state or is it a more yin state? Wow. So the way that I really like to bring this into our lives is to look at yin and yang. I call it nature's language. Again, so many different cultures have this perspective of yin yang in their own different language and their own different words. But for today, I do like to call yin yang nature's language, because when we have labels, like I said earlier, it can create division as much as it also brings us together. It brings us together in that we think we're talking about the same thing, but it is also decisive because a lot of our language, a lot of our words have preconceived notions to them. They have stigmas to them. And so what I like to do, and I do this as a healthcare practitioner, to build a bridge between, the medical language that a lot of patients don't know, but also needing to communicate with my patients that I'm truly understanding where they're coming from and what they're experiencing, so I can have a better understanding of what they're going through and how I might be able to help. And so I use this language of yin yang, cold, hot, heavy, light. I go into the qualitative words of yin and yang, and I introduce it to my patients. Usually in our conversation, I'm not letting them know I'm introducing it as yin and yang, but I simply begin to ask questions like, is it hot or cold? When you have anger, do you get more hot or do you get more cold? You'd think, and this is where I'd love to do group work, but we can't necessarily today. From my perspective, I get hot, and I assume everyone else gets hot. But the more and more I've worked with different groups and asking this, there's a huge subset of people who get very cold when they get angry, right?
Oh,
maybe their hands get cold, but like their face gets hot. And this is the yin and the yang, right? In interplay, certain parts of the body might get hot. Some people are just red everywhere, right? That heat and that yang moving out. And so we can use each one of these words. Is it heavy or is it light? Is that headache that you're experiencing, does it feel more light or does it feel heavy?
Mm-hmm.
And if some people, they don't know, they're like, I don't know, I've never thought about that. So I kind of go through these different words, and feel free to screenshot this, yin yang chart right here. I actually keep it on the back of my clipboard because some people are more visual than they are audio. And I'll actually just hand a list over and like, which one of these describes what you're experiencing in your body when you have fill in their chief complaint, right? Is it smooth or rough? Is it dull or sharp? This is a good one for pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is your pain more sharp in nature? Is it more dull? Stillness, movement, slow, fast. We can use these. Does it feel more contracted or expanded? I was working with someone today who has had migraines since the age of 5 and they're now 50. And she was explaining, she's like, right before I have the headache, everything contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And then it starts to spread and then it expands really quickly. And that's when the migraine comes on.
Wow.
Ooh, there's the interplay of yin and yang. We have this deep contraction before this kind of bursting of like, it's too much, and release. And so we ended up having a conversation. Does that sound familiar, what you just described to me, to any other parts of your life? And she just started laughing. She was like, that explains everything in my life. I go inward, I go inward, I go inward. Don't worry, I'm going to figure everything out until it just becomes too much. And then there's kind of this release of like, I can't do any of it, right? Like, and so for her in that moment, she just had this like, oh, these
Here's my pattern.
headaches.
Yeah.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
headaches are a reflection of something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
She would not, this particular person wouldn't have considered herself a healer or even understanding biofield or chi or energy. She just wanted her headaches to go away. And someone told her, have you tried acupuncture? And here she is having her own kind of aha moments using the language of yin and yang.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is what, again, in groups I like to do is break us out and say, okay, given these words, and then you can make your own, right? You can make your own qualitative description, but how would you describe a rose? Right. And I don't know if you want to pick one of these, Shamini. I know you and I were kind of flirting with this idea of anger, especially given, what's going on in
Given
the
the current
world.
circumstances, I think that might be a relevant one for us to talk about because we're all feeling the undercurrents of, the divisions, the separations, and often anger, indignance, disgust. A lot of these emotions are coming up for the human family right now. Um, and wars, lots of things happening in the world, not just in the United States. So interesting to think about how we would describe that, right? For each
Yeah.
of us. I think that's what you're leading us to, is to kind of
Yes.
consider, what does anger feel like for me? Forget about the world for a minute, but just
Yeah.
knowing that this is happening in the world and it does influence me. Well, how do I experience it, right? What is
Right.
anger for me? Yeah.
Yeah. And really anger can be the place where we all start. It's a concept we're familiar with. And emotions are also cultural. So bear with us. I'm going to assume that most of us here have an understanding of the word anger or that type of emotion. But yeah, that's where we start, is with that word. But now describe personally, how does anger show up in your life? Like, what does it feel like for you in the body? Okay. What does it feel like?
Right. Well, if I were to say for myself personally, it's very yang like, right? Definitely hot, rough, hard, sharp, fire, um, certainly movement, fast. Um, I would say all those things. I'm looking on the yin side now and seeing there's something about it that feels substantial, like I feel a density around it as well, even though it's fast moving. Um,
Yeah.
these other aspects, yeah, not so much of the yin for me. Contraction for sure. It feels more of a contraction because, it feels like I'm kind of getting more into my ego, when I'm angry. That's like there's an egoic wound there. But, that's my psychology person talking. So that's how I experience it. I mean, what about you, Hanani? How do you experience it?
Yeah, and I'm happy to share how I experience it, but I also want to point out that you could find some yin elements. You said it's more yang, but
Hmm.
there's the yin and the yang, right? Like there is some yin in that yang, but for you, you feel it more yang.
Hmm.
For me, I also feel the heat. I feel a lot of heat, but anger for me actually feels like an internal contraction.
Hmm.
Like even though everything's getting hot internally, everything feels like it's getting tight, like a rope. It's just like tightening up. And so for me, that a substantial, I would agree with that because it feels like all my insides are just going tight and bounding inward. That inward, all the arrows are going inward now.
Hmm.
It feels very dense. It feels heavy to me because, and maybe again, because of my relationship with anger, and maybe I haven't figured out more ways to be more expressive with it, but I'm not judging. I'm just, and I don't want to get too down the weeds, but for me I have this mix where it's both yang and hot, but for me it feels very yin. And it actually, for me, because it feels so heavy and in my body, it's not a word up here, but for a long time it felt scary.
Oh, yeah, scary. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
like I
Mm.
don't know what to do with it. And
Out
so
of
then
control, kind of. Yeah.
yeah. And so just to give an example, when I'm kind of at an odds of like, well, what does that even mean? I bring up the language of yin and yang again and I go, well, what's scary? And I'm going, oh, it's like it's dark. I see myself in a tunnel. It's fear. Oh, okay. Now we're actually working with two emotions here, not just anger, but my particular version of anger is oftentimes lumped in with these other qualities of fear. And so it gives me more insight to what I'm experiencing, having a little more compassion for myself. But now that I'm hearing your description of anger, it allows me to have a little more compassion for you. Oh,
Hmm.
you experience anger differently than me. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong to this. There's no a perfection anger. There's no, there's no one right way to do anger in here. Um, but to know that your version of anger is slightly different from mine, one is kind of just an aha moment,
Right.
but also allows us now to connect with each other in a different way.
Understanding the experience. The other thing that strikes me when I look at this and consider something like any emotion, including anger, is there is the experience of it, and then there's the expression of it. And I think you
Yeah.
you just touched on that so well, because as we kind of tap into the experience of it, and particularly perhaps the yin-like experience of it, then it's like, oh, maybe this is more related to feeling scared or out of control, the feeling of fear perhaps for many of us could feel more yin-like, but the expression of anger and how it's received may feel more yang-like for some of us, right? Certainly, most of us, I think, who experience people who are expressing anger may feel it more as a yang-like quality, but not recognize that actually what's happening internally and yet those qualities of yin really do have to relate to fear. And in psychology we say many things. We say many people are fond of saying anger is sadness, turned outward. Sadness is anger turned inward. So here again we see this reflection of the two, kind of encircling one experience, but the expression, the internal experience, and then kind of expressed outwardly, or the outward expression provided inwardly. So understanding that flow of energy through that internal experience and the expression of it is, I think, so helpful. And look, it's so nice when we can kind of try to get beyond those judgment labels, right? And just talk about the qualities of energy. I think this is so valuable for us in navigating our emotional health at this time, like, oh, I'm experiencing a lot of fire, or I'm feeling, the drain of water, or, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does. It acts as a regular, at least for me emotionally. And I just happen to be very an emotion, like in tune with my emotions. They're riding high and low all day long, right? So I needed to find, it was out of necessity to find whatever this theoretical term of centeredness mean that everyone was talking about in yoga for all those years. It's like, I'm
Mhm.
reading I'm reading it in all the books, but I'm not feeling it. And it
Mhm.
was really when I started to apply the language of yin and yang into my life. And in Ayurveda, there's a similar term, the Gurvadi gunas. Have you heard? The gunas are the
Yeah.
qualities. Gurvadi are the 10 pairs of or I'm sorry, 10 pairs, 20 qualities, but in 10 pairs of opposites. This is same here. What we're doing is we're describing something in qualities rather than just a label and keeping it as such. And so anytime I'm reading, even for example, watching the news or reading something and it gets me like all activated, right? You can begin, where this goes is you can begin to see how your relationship with the yin and yang changes. If someone on TV is acting very yang and outward and dominant, what is my reaction to that? Am I acting back with yang, like yang to yang, adding fire to fire, sun to sun? Or do I recoil and I become the yin to that yang?
Right.
And without judgment, there's no judgment. It's just a noticing, right? And so much of healing and medicine is about the noticing rather than just a label and a quick fix. We need to get to that deeper part of awareness. And this provides a framework for us to do that in relationship to each other as well.
It's energy judo, right? And
Yeah,
sometimes
I love that.
in these interpersonal interactions, we talk about this a lot. And going yin to yang, especially if it's natural, people will say, doesn't mean that I'm becoming more powerless, but now I'm learning, because what happens when we add fire to fire, right? We just create more fire, right? But if we throw earth on a fire, or we, express water to fire, we actually cool fire down. That's a judo thing. That's not
Yeah.
actually making the fire grow bigger. So it's, yes, all this, as we explore those qualities of energy that we're so fond of. Here's where we begin to work with, what I hear is, here's where we have these opportunities to work with the yin yang balance, to
Yeah,
balance our lives. And
absolutely.
because that's the number one question I think people want to know these days is, how do I work with energy to provide balance to myself and to the environment around me? And so how do we explore these qualities of interdependent, interacting, interpenetrating, interflowing yin and yang to provide more harmony and balance at this time? And you've given us some ideas. Any other ideas of, helpful hints at this time of working with the yin and yang, recognizing the qualities, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you took it to that next step that naturally I go to and share is that once we know this, we use the same language to bring balance to the opposite quality. So this is how Ayurveda works. This is how East Asian medicine, Chinese medicine works. Is we can, once we have awareness of what's going on and we know the qualities, we have choice now. Do I want to keep it in the pattern that it's at? And these are all without judgment, right? We can keep it in the same pattern. We can choose to change it. Well, how do we bring change to that? Well, there's a great saying in Ayurveda, and I've carried it over to my Chinese medicine practice, is like increase like, opposites balance, right? So that fire on fire, there's that increase. The opposite quality balances. And so that's essentially, what I went, and I have a very fancy, expensive piece of paper on my wall so that I get to work with people's lives. But that's what I do as a Chinese medicine practitioner, as an acupuncturist, is bringing balance to those areas that are in a certain pattern and trying to decipher, is that pattern the one creating the pathology, the disease, the discomfort, the pain, the stuckness? And if I bring in a different quality, the opposite quality, is that going to bring more harmony to that particular system? Right?
So beautiful. Such a beautiful practice. And we're often fond of saying, we remember that healing isn't an outcome, it's a process, and it's a
Yeah.
process to restore ourselves to wholeness.
Yeah.
Balance as an indication of a greater sense of wholeness and oneness and connection, coming back to the oneness through the balance of
Yeah.
yin and yang, as you so beautifully showed and reminded us that this is a sphere. It's not a two-dimensional thing. We're forever and always coming back into wholeness, and we have choice points along the way, pretty much every minute, every unit of time.
Yeah, and something that I didn't point out on the slide that was talking about the body, but I want to make sure everyone is aware. We can use the yin yang symbol, that sphere, right? Not the two-dimensional, the sphere, to also understand our nervous systems. That the sympathetic nervous
That's
system
right.
is associated more with the yang, and this parasympathetic nervous system is associated more with the yin.
Yeah.
And so it's also reminding us that our nervous systems are actually designed to move, to constantly be in movement and to adapt to our surroundings, our internal processes, as well as the external surrounding in this really dynamic way. It's not this on off, like sympathetic, parasympathetic,
That's right.
like in this teeter-totter way, but it's more of a cyclical movement. And that part of harmony is reestablishing the nervous system's ability to move in all different ways, to be very yin, but also to be a little yin, a little yang, to also be very yang when it's needed, right? Like when your life's on the line, I sure hope your nervous system can, go to full yang.
That's
And
right.
so that's also how I like to work with it and remind people about that cyclical nature of it, its ability to be adaptable, that within yin there's yang, within yang there's yin.
Yeah. It's really great. These are principles of life that we see, as you mentioned, sort of the fractal nature, what I would call the fractal nature, right? Of yin and yang.
Exactly.
We see it everywhere. We see it in nature, we see it in our bodies. We can go down to the tiniest level of scale. We could apply yin yang principles, and I'm sure people do in these whole system medicine approaches. We can apply yin yang to the behavior of cells. We could go, all the way into that microscopic and macroscopic, the planets and the universe, right? And we do that
Absolutely.
as well. But yeah, I love the practical approach that you're encouraging us to take to perhaps look at a point of conflict in our lives, whether it's in our mind body health, or our environment, our relationships, our home, whatever it is, and say, where can I bring balance to this? What are the qualities that I'm noticing about the issue? And perhaps
Mhm.
even my response to that issue, psychologist here has to say that. And then
It's
and then
all
how could
part of
I,
it.
yeah, and then how could I look at those beautiful, balancing qualities, those opposite
Yeah.
qualities, see how I could bring more balance to the situation. Is so beautiful, so valuable. Okay, and I want to honor the Q&As that are here.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, Haunani, we'll move into those. I see a
Please.
couple. Anybody else who want to throw in Q&As, this is the time. Please, not in the chat. I won't see it, but if you put it in the Q&A box, I will. And I think Sean's is more of a reflection, really, but maybe there's a question in here too. So I'm just going to read it out and
Okay,
then we can
thank you.
riff on it. My biggest question is based on health. So many people in the spiritual metaphysical world are obsessed with perfection as it relates to 100% perfect health. What about where the wound is the light shines through, like Rumi says? And, essentially that's what he's saying is what this, again, perceived duality of, and this is really key because a lot of us are discussing in the field, as you know, trauma, ancestral trauma, wanting to release trauma, and there's still this feeling that is pushed upon by marketing, I would say, from many different um, companies that are pushing us to believe that balance in this case is a static thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What's your riff on that from a yin yang perspective?
Well, it comes back to the sphere, right? Like if you are looking at a two-dimensional, it's like almost becomes a teeter-totter, right? Or it's like that bullseye that, or here's a pen, right? Like at a teeter-totter, that's balance right there, where it's not too far down, not too far, it's right there. Well, that point, that's unrealistic. That's the perfectionist. Or like a bullseye where only the center matters. That's the bullseye, and that's balance. And that's it's flattening a that spherical movement of our lives into an illusion, really what it is. And so I call myself a recovering perfectionist, so I really understand this question, and that this was really helpful to understanding that balance is one, self-defined. What you consider balance in your life, Shamani, is if I tried to do that in mine, it would probably throw me way out of balance. And for each of us. So it's a self-defining thing. And again, what I love about East Asian medicine, or even Asian in Ayurveda too, is that sense of balance and wholeness is only able to be defined by oneself. No matter how fancy a doctor's degree is, they ultimately are not in your body. So we have to come to understand, well, what does balance mean then? And a lot of us, I think, don't actually spend enough time to decide, what would my life look like? What would my health look like? What would my emotions feel like? Not based on what everyone's telling me it should be like,
Mm-hmm.
but how would that feel in my body to take a moment and just go, oh, maybe I'm already there, but I'm so worried on all these other things that everyone's telling me I'm not doing that I
Mm-hmm.
feel out of balance.
We have a very yang driven society, right? I mean, it's almost the feeling that like, oh, if I'm not doing, if I'm not productive at all costs, if I'm not thinking, if I'm not acting, if I'm not reacting, then there's something
Mm-hmm.
wrong with me. I
Yeah,
hope, I think people the joining us here on this circle feel differently, but we do have to recognize that societal influence, right? That
yeah,
societal influence is great. And I love what you said about the return to balance happens in a moment of consciousness.
yeah,
I can
absolutely.
literally
Yeah,
take a
a
breath.
presence.
Yep. I can literally take a breath and be like, let me breathe, let me be present,
Yes.
and then let me address how I want to energetically work with the current situation or even the state of my mind.
Yeah.
That's what's so beautiful about this. It's so dynamic. You can literally shift your energy in a second
Yeah.
uh, just by
And
taking that moment.
what your definition of balance in the morning, it will likely look very different from what your definition of balance is at middle of noon when the sun is at its peak. It'll look different in spring than it looks in winter, right? And it reminds us that it has to be mobile. Yin and yang is a mobile, like everything's in movement, which also means your harmony, your balance, your sense of self is also going to change through the season, through the time of day, through your different life. Balance as a child is going to look different, and balance as a 20-year-old, that's going to look different in your 40s, in your 60s, in your 80s, right?
Yeah.
And so it gives us permission to not be so static and fixed on a certain definition. It
Yeah.
gives us permission to be human on this moving planet where everything is in change.
Oh, I love it, Haunani. You're so speaking my language, just as a quick aside, but this is, I think, relevant because I was recently at a wonderful conference. This particular one was with Deepak Chopra's group and a wonderful group in Mallorca called Sages and Scientists. And so we had multiple panels, and one panel that they asked me to be on was longevity. Well, I mean, long story short, I didn't know I was going to be on a panel on longevity, but I said, sure, I'll bring the biofield perspective to it, right? So they were interviewing one of the top people in longevity research. I mean, wonderful work that this gentleman was doing. But as he was speaking, I realized that there was this sense of longevity, perhaps not being as dynamic. When we think about things from the energy perspective,
Mhm.
then, I shared some thoughts and insights based on what our observations of nature, that this very thing, even the way that we conceive of what we mean by longevity and flourishing, these concepts that we like to throw out and about in the medical and psychological fields, is completely dynamic, completely situation dependent, and certainly doesn't look the same at different ages and stages of life. And to think that we need to go back to a certain stage of life is preposterous. Nature just doesn't work that way, right? So I'm so grateful for this conversation because this energy perspective that you and that so many in our community are putting out there is really going to help shed wisdom to the greater community of how healing works and how we can flourish at any time, even given crazy circumstances.
Yeah.
So Sanaya has a question about density. And her question is, can you expand on density and how it relates to yin and yang energy? So I know you touched on this a bit, but
Yeah.
um,
And I noticed maybe we did touch on it because it was earlier, maybe time stamped earlier in our in the time together. But I'm gonna try to describe it in one other way that I
mhm,
think will really resonate with us here. So when we're looking at yin and yang, against they're relational to each other, they're always together. But if we were trying to bring it again back to the body, and Shamini, I know you keep saying, well, as a psychologist, right? Like when we look at the term body, like the physical body in relationship to the emotion or the psychology part of the body, one of our bodies, right?
mhm.
I'm just curious to you. I would like to send this back out to the community or whoever asked this. Which one would be more yin? Which one would be more yang?
Right. Yeah,
If,
feel free to throw in the chat, you guys, which one
yeah.
you think is more yin and which one is more yang. And maybe repeat the question again.
Okay, the question would be, if we're looking at these two parts, the physical body as one, and
Mhm.
then the mind aspect, or the thoughts, the psychology part, the emotional part of the body, we know it's just a different layer of the body. Which one is more yang? Which one's more yin?
Yes. So Pilar says yin is body, yang is mental emotional. That would be my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it absolutely is. And the way that, so at you, I just shared with you, I'm teaching a class of introduction to East Asian medicine to undergraduates at William and Mary, and I
So
asked them
wonderful
this.
you're doing that, by the way. Thank you,
Uh,
thank you, thank you. That's
no, I
so
know, I feel
wonderful.
so blessed. I'm like, the future leaders of the world. I'm planting seeds. Go out there into politics and medicine and economics. Computer science. Take this with you. But we just asked this, and so many of them, right? They're like, I'm just taking this. I didn't know what I'm signing up for. This is very too much for me, meaning like on the woo woo side, right? But now we're in it. They're in it. They're like, they have to take this class. And it's been so fun to see those aha moments of the people who are like, chi, energy, whatever. All of a sudden they're going, oh, well, when you put it that way, well, yeah, I have lots of experiences, like, okay. And this is how I described it. If I took a dissection, and I'm sorry if you're squeamish, but the things that we can do in a dissection, that's yin, that's of the substance, that's of the material. But when I say, how many of you have had, I'm going to give a different emotion, sadness. If I open up the body in a dissection, I can't see your sadness, but we know it still exists. It's a universal emotion. So to say that just because we can't see it or dissect it or measure it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I know that there's some people out there trying to measure the different emotions, and I love that research. You're one of them. But that always captures people. They go, oh yeah, I guess you can't see my sadness in a dissection or like under a microscope, but I know I've had that. It's
Yeah.
so subtle. It's yang. It's so subtle.
Yeah. I
It's
love
energy.
that. Wow,
Yeah.
I literally feel like we just got started, and I would love to be continuing this conversation because there's so much wisdom here, and a lot of people are giving lots of thanks and asking, oh, I want to
Oh,
respond to
wonderful.
this question. Um, will there be a replay? How can I share this with others? And others like, yes, let's do this again. Yeah, I think we should get Haunani back to do a workshop with us so we can make it practical. It's a question about group dynamics and how we kind of put this into practice. So here's what I want to tell you on behalf of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. First, yes, you will receive a link to a free replay of this dialogue with Haunani for the next 48 hours, which you can enjoy all weekend and share with your friends all weekend. You'll also find it on our social media channels for the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. Just look up Consciousness and Healing Initiative on Facebook or YouTube, and you will find this webinar there for the next 48 hours. Now, it is available in perpetuity. We are a social profit organization. That is, we are a 501c3 organization. We bring dialogues like this to you from leaders like Haunani because we are so passionate about scaling this work. But like any organization, we have to have money to keep the lights on, to feed the staff, to cover the Zoom costs, the emails. You get the picture, right? So there's costs that are associated with us being able to do this. And the way that we're able to do this is through the wonderful support of people like you who join us and support the organization either through a flat donation or by joining us as a Chi contributor. Jason is putting the link in the chat. Jason, if you've got a slide that you want to throw up about the Chi contributorships, I think that'd be awesome. You can look at chi.is/join. For $9 a month, or the cost of, a green juice a month, you can join us as a Chi contributor, and you will have access to Haunani's dialogue, as well as about 90 plus hours of amazing dialogues with leaders in the field like Haunani and so many more on topics related to consciousness and healing. It is a treasure trove. You also get free meditations in your inbox every month, free, scientific insights with the latest and greatest science that's being published now so that you can freely share that with your community and be empowered to share the latest science, practices, and continue to be nurtured by the community of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. For that $108 donation, which is tax deductible, for the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, you are supporting us to keep this going. People like to call us the PBS of healing. We'll take it, we will, and we want to continue doing it. So yes, for those of you who are already contributing. You know, Carolina says it's so worth it and more. Thank you so much for your support. We cannot do this without you. I really hope you will join us as a Chi contributor. Jason, thank you so much. And just one more note, Jason, if you want to go back to the course, it's wisdom like this that is going to really help scale out in our community. We have a wonderful offering at the moment, which is our Science of Healing course. I believe today is the last day to get a really deep discount on the course. You see all these wonderful people here. They are all guest faculty on the course. Amazing course that goes through consciousness, subtle bodies, energy healing, the science behind it, placebo, mind-body practices, scaling healing in healthcare. It's all here, and we're going to have live Q&As with me as part of that. Please check it out. You can go to scienceofhealingcourse.com. We have a ridiculously low price. This course is worth thousands. It really is. And I think the low price only today till the end of the day, I believe, is $297. It is well worth it. And you can check the glowing testimonials after. I really highly encourage you to jump into that. I'm honestly, as you can tell, I'm very proud of what we do here at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. It is a labor of love for all of our team members. I'm so grateful to everyone that makes these gatherings possible and this education possible. And Haunani, so grateful for you. So grateful for you sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us today. And any parting words or thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we close for the hour?
No, just thank you to you and all the work you're doing. You know, I'm a super fan, and just so blessed that universe brought us together back in our earlier days. And here we go. Keep that journey going. And I'm open to people if they have questions after this. I think someone asked about my handle in Instagram. I'm not on the socials as much as I used to be, but it is Chi and Prana. So at
Ian Prana. Yeah, please throw it in the chat. And
um,
if Jason has your website as well, or any other
yeah,
ways that they can get in
it's
touch.
it's the
Okay,
same, chiandprana.com. Um,
great.
and you can reach out to me that way. I would love to have these conversations continue, but my main ask is really for all of us to just start practicing this in our own lives and beginning to model this as a way both in our own personal lives, but clinically if you're in the clinic or your professional life as an accountant, wherever you are, so that people can begin to understand that we can create connection, right, in a world that feels very disconnected. We can do it. The models, our ancestors gave us models long ago, and we can do it. And so let's really be stewards of that and keep that energy flowing so that we are all moving in that direction towards healing and mending that we all seek.
Oh, I love it, Haunani. Thank you. Thank you for your light. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your time and your grace. And thank you everyone for joining us today.